You have to take a heroic dose under the right conditions to really smash through. I mean, yes, there are all kinds of approaches to it. Insight into childhood trauma, recovery of lost memories, opening to your emotional side, insights into the dynamics of the life and people around, all of it. But that is not anywhere near the bullseye. That's just dancing around the rim of it.
It's a wild ride. It's a very, very wild ride. And like I said, I know there is many more levels to get to, and there's way more to explore. But I feel like the heroic dose of 5 grams is kind of a rite of passage and a threshold into the full immersion psilocybin world.
This is what Terence McKenna calls a heroic dose, and he calls it for a very good reason. Now, based on many tests that he's done on himself and his friends, this is kind of the level where you experience ego death and a transformational consciousness experience.
For myself, I went through very heavy visuals this time around. I remember laying on the floor and I was staring up at the ceiling, and they had one of those speckled ceilings, like a popcorn ceiling. And I was sitting there watching it, and it was like putting on a show for me. If you guys know what fractals are, they're kind of like those geometric shapes that kind of interweave and flow in and out of each other, and that's what the ceiling was doing for me.
The come up was so quick and so intense. It was like a roller coaster or a rocket ship. The amount of energy that was being like balled up and released inside my brain was equivalent to a bomb or a thunderstorm going off outside the window.
But after about half an hour, the mushrooms really started to kick in. My walls were vibrating, were pulsing, were resonating, and the internal dialogue inside my mind got pretty strong. It was like I was getting taken for a ride by the mushrooms themselves. Now, one of the most important parts of the journey is to surrender and let go to the experience.
So along with seeing all these crazy visuals and seeing these fractals and kind of being in control but not in control, there was a lot of deep contemplation. There's a lot of your own life kind of resonates through this as you're kind of sitting in the passenger seat, and you're really questioning a lot about yourself, your life, your motives, your ideals, your morals and your values. You're questioning all these kind of things.
So the visions started to get really intense. I closed my eyes and I just let the mushrooms take my mind wherever they wanted me to go. So where did they take me? Well, there are a lot of things that I can't really explain and describe or put into words. But one of the things that I do remember was being shown all the suffering in the world, all the people that are starving, all the people that are stressed, all the people that are ill. And I felt deep compassion for this collective group of people that need love and compassion to lift them out of this state. It also made me realize my connection to all things, that the suffering in the world is also my suffering as well. And the connection that I have to people that I don't even know, to inanimate objects, to nature. There is a fundamental connection there, this connection of consciousness. And for myself, I've experienced a lot of fear around connecting and letting go and to surrendering to unconditional love. And it really just gave me some insight into this concept that everything is connected, to just relax, to surrender, to let go and let life take you where you need to go.
Supernatural, super nature experience, connecting to nature. And there was this one point which was like the epitome of the experience, I guess, because yeah, this whole mushroom experience was the life is the trip, life and feeling and emotion and is the trip, and experiencing the everyday nature, that's the trip.
One of the most clear visions that I remember, it was like I was a part of this giant being. It's kind of hard to explain, but this thing had like almost like tentacles, but each living thing was a tentacle, and it was like we were feeding all of our life experience to some central database. I don't know. It was pretty crazy.
By the time I was like, oh yeah, this is a trip going on, I tried to look at a clock to see how long it had been, and I couldn't understand what numbers were. I actually saw like the numbers like float away into the room, and I was like touching them. You know, it was full on. The visuals were uncontrollable with my eyes open. And I was going between laying down with my eyes closed, and then the closed eye visuals were so intense that they basically became a dream. And it was like reliving memories, living alternate realities with friends that had died, you know, and having moments in the future with them still alive, looking in the mirror and seeing people that were dead talk to you and tell you took my friend who had died about a year before that, I looked in the mirror and it was him, and he said, "You took too much." So visuals like that, you know, where everyone's like, "Oh, I'm getting visuals." Once they get to the point where you can't stop them and can't distinguish them from reality, I don't know. It's a different world. That's, you know, that's different from tracers.
I went outside and I started playing in the water. It was like I was a kid again, you know, like I just felt like a kid again, playing in the water and being free and experiencing nature. And me and my friend were throwing pine cones, and we were hearing the like, it was just so wicked. The sounds, our vision, our feeling, the whole experience was just probably one of the most beautiful and playful experience that I have ever had with mushrooms, especially at a 5-gram dose, where usually you'd want to be sitting down or in silent darkness.
I remember my perception of time was just smashed. Like, I remember I had a thought and I thought it was funny, and so I was laughing pretty hard. Like, I was very blissful in the moment, so I was like absolutely laughing super hard, and I thought it was merely just a thought and then it was over, but my friend told me that I was actually laughing for 2 hours straight.
And it was very hard to know how long I had been under. I mean, when you're up in the galaxy, you know, like in this, and you're floating around, and there's no body, and you're just a consciousness among the rest of everything that is consciousness. I mean, what is time at that point, you know? I mean, it felt like eons. It felt like I was there forever. And then when I would open my eyes, it was so disorienting to be back in a human body that I would just lose my mind. I'd be wandering around the house. I was like sitting there for like 10 minutes flicking the light on and off because I didn't even know what was going on.
I eventually laid down and I started to become the earth. Like, I know it sounds weird, but it was like the rotation of the earth is what I was becoming, and I could see that I was moving with the planet, that we were all part of this moving system with the earth. And in that moment I saw that there was no death, there was no such thing as dying, because it's just this constant rotation and revolution of the earth, that as we age and grow, we just expand, you know, into something super, super spiritual and beyond our comprehension.
So yeah, and by the time, and it was very wavy. I would be like out, like floating around in my head, floating around in space, having all these realizations, you know, of being like, oh my God, like, I've been here before. This is what happens when you die. I've been here before. Everybody's been here before. A countless amount of times. This has never began and it never ended. And you die, you go up, you come back down, and it's just a cycle. And you remember that so clearly. So I believe that was the full ego death, coming to that realization.
I remember feeling another vision. It was like the universe was this giant organism, like some sort of, like a being, an organism, and I felt like the the planets were like animals on it, and then it just kept getting microscopic, like shrunk down more and more and more until you got to the humans, and we were like this tiny little, almost insect-like being on the organism of the universe. So that was also a pretty crazy feeling.
You have this very deep contemplation, and while you're going through it too, like, you can kind of articulate it, but you can't in a way. It's like you understand it and you're trying to explain yourself to others, but in a way you can't, because it's like, it makes sense to you, but in that experience you can't explain yourself. Now the following day, I find the following week to a month after, you're looking back at that experience, and you're still deeply contemplating a lot of these things about yourself and your life. And again, if you're a person who's never seen visuals and seen things moving, this is going to make you question everything you know about yourself, because you're like, I know this world, I know it in and out. This is a table, this is a computer, this is me. And then you experience this thing that you've never seen before, and where you're not in control of it. And it can really, the next day to a week to a month later, you're still contemplating these things.
We just played and played, and it was just a beautiful experience. And we eventually, he let his dogs out, and he had like 4 or 5 big dogs, and they were running around and just loving on us. And there were times when I could kid you guys not, it was like it was telepathic with these animals, to where we were sitting down and putting our heads on the heads of these animals, and it was like we could be telepathic, almost like I was communicating with them mentally, you know. And they were just all love, all fun, all pure intention that these animals were.
So as I mentioned earlier, it's a very emotional experience, along with all this contemplating. Little things that aren't really funny just make you giggle and laugh like uncontrollably, like you feel like a child again when you're fully engulfed in this laughter. And again, if you're someone who's very ego dominated, you don't have that kind of laughter. An experience like this, where you can really get into all these deep emotional states, might be something good for yourself. Now, there were times where I was laughing so hard I was crying, like there was actual tears coming out of my eyes. And there were some times where I'm staring up at the ceiling and I'm contemplating and seeing all these visuals, and it was very awe-inspiring. Like, not like you're talking to God or seeing God, but because you're seeing these things that you can't experience in your everyday, day-to-day life. Like, it's very like emotional. It's very like, yeah, it's very, very hard to explain as well too. So
most of the lessons have come afterwards. Just telling this story on this camera right now, I'm remembering more and more. Every time I tell a story, I'm like, oh yeah, and that happened. Oh yeah, and that happened. I look at it like I received a big download from the universe, but it was a zip file. And if you're trying to understand it while it's coming at you, you can't. It's too much information too quick. Once you unzip it, there's a lot of lessons to be learned.
Now, everybody's experience is different, and I just felt like sharing mine with you, because I believe these plants are real teachers. They're medicine. They shouldn't be treated as illicit drugs with no therapeutic purposes whatsoever. And all the research that's coming out of the institutions like MAPS and the Johns Hopkins Research University, some of the research coming out of these institutions is showing that psilocybin helps people overcome this fear of death, particularly in patients with terminal illnesses like cancer. So these are very profound impacts from a therapeutic perspective, but also for me, it's all about expanding my consciousness, figuring out more about who I am, and getting some deep realizations about the nature of reality.